So yeah, I guess I should start by saying I'm Eve, I'm 24, and my life basically imploded 6 months ago. Everyone's acting like I'm some kind of monster, but honestly, they're all just being dramatic. Like, let me explain what actually happened, because nobody's telling this story right. I met Mason when I was 20, back when I thought having a stable guy was the dream. He's 28 now, some big shot systems analyst at a tech company, you know the type. Total nerd who somehow landed a hot wife. That's me, by the way. We were doing fine, living in this small apartment that he mostly paid for, while I worked at this trendy restaurant downtown and took some online classes when I felt like it. Mason always acted like he was so proud of supporting my dreams or whatever, but sometimes I could tell he was low-key judging me for not having my life completely figured out. I started at Harvest and Rye about 6 months ago, and it was like finally having something that was just mine, you know? The crew there is amazing. We're like a family. Everyone's young, fun, and we all just click. Especially Chase, our bartender. And before anyone starts with their assumptions, no, nothing happened between us. Chase just gets me. He's got this way of making every shift feel like a party, always cracking jokes and making everyone laugh. Mason started getting weird about me working there pretty quick. Like, Chase would text me a funny meme about something that happened during our shift, and Mason would get all quiet and mopey. He'd say stuff like, "Don't you think Chase is a little too friendly? Or maybe you should mention you're married at work." God, it was so embarrassing how insecure he was being. I mean, yeah, Chase is attractive. I'm not blind. And maybe he flirts a little, but that's literally his job. He's a bartender. Mason just couldn't handle that. I finally had my own thing going on. He was used to me being this perfect little wife who just sat at home while he played video games or whatever. The more I got into my job, the more he'd try to check up on me, randomly showing up for lunch like some kind of creepy stalker. My sister Sarah came to visit last month and immediately started with the same nonsense. We went to the restaurant on her first night in town. My idea, because our food is actually amazing, and she got all weird about how Chase and I were vibing or whatever. After we left, she tried to give me this whole speech about playing with fire and respecting boundaries. I'm like, seriously? You're going to come at me with that married for 10 years, mom of two wisdom? Not everyone wants that boring life. The funny thing is, I actually loved Mason. Like, genuinely. He was my safe space, my sure thing. I just wish he could have been secure enough to let me have my own identity outside of being his wife. But nope, he had to go and make everything weird. And trust me, that's just the beginning of this story. Nobody saw what was coming next, especially not Mason. Looking back now, I guess I can see why some people might say I should have handled things differently. But honestly, everything that happened after this was basically just Mason's insecurity blowing up in his face. Literally. So things started getting really tense at home. Mason would try to act all casual about it, but I could tell he was stalking my Facebook, watching every time Chase liked one of my posts or commented something funny. He'd make these little passive-aggressive comments like, "Oh, late shift with Chase again?" Or "Must have been a fun night, saw all the photos." Like, way to tell on yourself for being obsessed, right? I started dreading coming home after my closing shifts because I knew Mason would be sitting there in his gaming chair, pretending to be busy but actually just waiting to interrogate me. He'd ask all these detailed questions about my night, trying to catch me in some kind of lie. As if I couldn't have friends just because I was married. The more he pushed, the more I started staying out later with my work crew. Not even doing anything wild, just hanging out at Denny's after our shifts, unwinding and laughing about customer drama. Chase noticed something was off with me one night and asked what was wrong. When I told him about Mason's jealousy, he just shook his head and said I deserved better than some insecure guy trying to control me. It felt good having someone actually see my side of things, you know? Chase always knew how to make me feel better. Just a shoulder bump or a stupid joke, and suddenly work felt like an escape from all the drama at home. The thing that really got to me was how Mason started trying to make me feel guilty about making good money and tips. Like, he'd make these comments about how I must be really friendly with the customers to make that much. Yeah? It's called being good at my job? Just because he was stuck in his boring office all day didn't mean I had to pretend to hate my life too. My work friends became my real support system. They didn't judge me or try to make me feel bad about having fun. We had this group chat that was constantly blowing up with memes and inside jokes, the kind of stuff Mason would probably analyze for hidden meanings if he knew about it. Chase was usually the one making everyone laugh. And yeah, sometimes his jokes were a little flirty, but that's just how people are in the restaurant industry. I did notice Mason was getting more and more worked up, though. He started hitting the gym more, trying to bulk up, or whatever. It was kind of sad, honestly, like watching him try to compete with guys like Chase, who naturally looked good without trying. He even bought some new clothes and started styling his hair differently. I probably should have found it sweet that he was trying so hard, but it just came across as desperate. Everything came to a head when our restaurant announced the summer staff party. Mason immediately got weird about it, asking if partners were invited. When I told him it was employees only, which was true by the way, he got this look on his face like I'd just confirmed all his suspicions. I ended up having to lie and say I'd ask my manager about making an exception, just to get him to drop it. I knew bringing him would just make everything awkward. Looking back, maybe I should have stuck to that lie. The week before the party was when everything really started falling apart. My sister Sarah decided to play marriage counselor again and showed up unannounced at the restaurant during my shift. She sat at the bar, watching everything like some kind of spy. I knew exactly what she was doing, trying to catch me doing something wrong so she could run back and report to Mason. Chase was working that night, and honestly, he was just being normal Chase. Making jokes, doing that thing where he leans in close to talk during rushes, touching my arm when we'd laugh about something. Nothing inappropriate, just normal restaurant stuff. But Sarah kept giving me these looks, and I knew exactly what lecture was coming. Sure enough, she cornered me after my shift. "Eve, I love you, but what are you doing?" she started, all concerned big sister voice. "I saw how you are with Chase. If I were Mason, and I saw that..." I cut her off right there. I was so sick of everyone acting like I was some child who needed supervision. "If you were Mason," I snapped back, "you'd be a grown man who doesn't need his wife's sister checking up on him." That just made her go full mom mode. She started bringing up our parents' divorce, talking about how Dad's innocent friendship with his secretary started just like this. As if that had anything to do with me. I'm nothing like Dad. I actually love Mason. I just don't think being married means I have to stop being my own person. The next day, Mason did something that really showed how pathetic his jealousy had gotten. He changed his lunch break to overlap with our pre-shift prep time and started showing up at the restaurant almost every day. He'd sit there with his laptop, pretending to work, while obviously watching every interaction I had with Chase. It was mortifying. Even my other coworkers started noticing and making jokes about my personal security guard. Chase handled it like a champ, though. He'd make a point to be extra professional whenever Mason was there, calling me Mrs. Thompson, and barely even looking in my direction. Then the second Mason left, he'd do this hilarious impression of him hunched over his laptop, complete with fake typing and exaggerated suspicious glances. Everyone would crack up, and I'd feel that familiar relief of being back with people who actually got me. The day before the party, Mason tried to have this serious talk about our marriage. He sat me down and started saying all this stuff about how I'd changed and how he missed the way we used to be. He actually started tearing up a little, talking about how he felt like he was losing me. Part of me felt bad seeing him like that, but a bigger part was just embarrassed. Like, who gets this worked up about their wife having work friends? I told him he was being dramatic and that he needed to work on his insecurity because it was getting out of hand. I did feel a little guilty, though, so I told him he could come to the party after all. His whole face lit up, and he started talking about how it would be good for him to get to know my work family better. I remember thinking how annoying it was going to be having to babysit his feelings all night. God, I had no idea what was actually going to happen. The party started out normal enough. We'd rented out this local bar's back room, and everyone was in a great mood. Mason was trying way too hard, doing this weird fake laugh thing whenever anyone made a joke. I kept catching him watching me, especially when Chase was around. Chase was basically running the party, mixing special cocktails, and getting everyone hyped up. I was actually having fun despite Mason being there. Our crew has this thing where we take group photos every time we hang out, so when Chase called everyone together for pictures, I didn't think twice about it. We were all squished together. And Chase had his arm around my shoulders. Totally normal party stuff, right? But I could see Mason's face getting redder and redder from across the room. Looking back, I probably should have noticed how much Chase was drinking. He kept getting more touchy as the night went on, fixing my hair, putting his hand on my back when he'd squeeze past me. At one point, he whispered something about a funny customer story in my ear, and I could practically feel Mason's eyes burning into us. But I wasn't doing anything wrong. If Mason wanted to sit there torturing himself all night, that was his choice. Everything exploded when Chase started telling everyone about this regular customer who'd been hitting on me all week. He was doing his usual thing, acting it out and making everyone laugh. Then he said something like, "Don't worry though, I've been protecting your girl, Mason," and winked at me. I laughed because, what else are you supposed to do? But Mason suddenly stood up, knocking his chair over. The whole room got quiet as Mason walked over. His voice was shaking when he asked Chase what exactly he meant by your girl. Chase just smirked and said, "Maybe if you checked on your wife more, other guys wouldn't have to." And then, I swear I'm not making this up, Mason actually tried to look tough. He got right in Chase's face and said something about respecting marriage. Chase just laughed and told Mason he should keep better track of his wife because apparently I never mentioned being married at work. Which wasn't totally true. I mean, they knew I had a husband, I just didn't make it my whole personality. Mason's face went completely white. He looked at me like he didn't even know who I was. What happened next was so fast. Mason shoved Chase, which was already shocking because Mason had never been in a fight in his life. Chase barely moved. He does this boxing training thing 3 times a week. He just looked at Mason kind of sadly and said, "Man, no wonder your wife comes to me for attention." I knew Mason was going to try something stupid. I could see it in his face. But before I could say anything, he tried to throw this awful excuse for a punch. Chase just moved slightly and bam! One hit and Mason was on the ground, completely out cold. The weird thing is, in that moment, I was actually scared. I ran over to Mason, trying to wake him up while someone called an ambulance. Chase just stood there looking kind of shocked, like he hadn't meant to hit him that hard. The party completely fell apart after that. I rode to the hospital with Mason, but the whole time I kept thinking about how he'd ruined everything by trying to act tough. I mean, what did he expect was going to happen? The first few days after the incident were super weird. Mason barely talked to me, just moped around the apartment with this kicked puppy look on his face. Everyone kept acting like I needed to quit my job or something. Even Chase was being distant at work, which was totally unnecessary. It wasn't my fault Mason decided to play tough guy. About 2 weeks after it happened, I was telling the story to our new hostess, and I found myself kind of laughing about it. I mean, it was pretty funny if you thought about it. Mason trying to act all macho and getting dropped with one punch. After that, it became this running joke. Whenever Mason would try to talk to me about working on our marriage or whatever, I'd just giggle and say, "Remember what happened last night, that insecure?" Mason would get this look on his face every time I brought it up, like he was going to cry or something. But honestly, he needed to learn to laugh about it. It was in the past, and being all sensitive about it wasn't helping anyone. I told him that's what he gets for trying to act tough when everyone knows that's not who he is. The real drama started when he realized I was still working with Chase. He actually expected me to quit my job over his bruised ego. I shut that down real quick. "What, you want a rematch?" I'd say, and crack up laughing. Mason would just go quiet and leave the room. It became my go-to comeback whenever he tried to stand up to me about anything. Our friends started acting weird about it too. We were at dinner with our couple friends Mike and Jenny, and Mason was trying to talk about some work promotion he got. I wasn't really listening, so I just cut him off with, yeah, just try not to get knocked out celebrating. Mike and Jenny just sat there staring at their plates while I laughed. Mason got up and left the restaurant. Such a drama queen. The thing is, I barely even talked to Chase anymore at work. He kept his distance, which was fine. I had other work friends, but I wasn't about to let Mason's insecurity control my life. Every time he brought up me quitting, I'd remind him how his last brilliant idea worked out. At least Chase knows how to take a joke, I'd say, watching Mason's face just crumble. Mason got quieter and quieter as the weeks went on. He started sleeping in the guest room, which was honestly kind of nice. No more lectures about my late shifts or him checking my phone while I slept. When his mom called to check on him, I told her the whole story, laughing about how her son tried to act tough. She hung up on me. Talk about not being able to take a joke. The weird thing was, the more Mason pulled away, the more I kept bringing up the knockout. It was like I couldn't help myself. Anytime he tried to act like he had an opinion about anything, I'd shut him down with a reminder of what happened last time he tried to act tough. I didn't see what the big deal was. If he was still embarrassed about it, that was his problem. Maybe if he hadn't tried to control me and act all macho, none of this would have happened. The night everything finally fell apart, we were at dinner with his parents. Mason was trying to talk about our future or whatever, and I just couldn't help myself. Remember that time you tried to act tough and got knocked out? I started cackling, but for once, nobody was even pretending to smile. His mom just got up and left the table. Mason didn't even look at me, just stared at his plate with this empty look I'd never seen before. The next day, I came home from my shift to find half the apartment empty. His gaming setup, his clothes, all his little nerdy collectibles, gone. His mom had helped him move out while I was at work. All he left was this note saying how me keeping my job and constantly mocking him showed him exactly how little I cared about him. Like, way to be dramatic? I got on Facebook right away to tell my side of the story, but people actually took his side. My own sister commented about how she saw this coming and that I should be ashamed of myself. Ashamed? Please. I'm young, hot, and finally free from all his insecurity and drama. I blocked anyone who tried to come at me with that negativity. Okay, so maybe things have been a little rough since then. The apartment is crazy expensive on just my server salary, and I had to start selling some of my designer bags to make rent. But that's temporary. A bad bitch like me doesn't need a man to survive. So what if I had to downgrade my phone plan and start taking the bus? At least I'm not dealing with someone trying to control my life anymore. Everyone's acting like I'm the bad guy here, but I stuck to my vows. I stayed with him even after he embarrassed himself in front of all my coworkers. If anything, he's the one who gave up on our marriage just because he couldn't take a joke. His whole family blocked me after he left, which is super childish. Even Chase barely talks to me at work now. Men are so sensitive. Yeah. Maybe I'm eating ramen for dinner most nights and had to start donating plasma to make ends meet. But that's not the point. The point is that I'm living life on my terms now. So what if my electricity got shut off last week? At least nobody's trying to tell me who I can be friends with or where I can work. I'm already on some dating apps, looking for someone more on my level. Someone who can handle a confident woman and take a joke. The right guy will appreciate that I'm not some basic wife who just does whatever her husband says. Sure, my credit score is trashed and I'm behind on every bill, but those are just numbers. I'm out here living my best life. My sister keeps trying to tell me I need therapy and should take accountability for my actions. Whatever. She's just jealous that I'm young and single, while she's stuck in her boring mom life. So what if I had to explain to my landlord for the third time why my rent is late? That's just temporary. A queen like me always lands on her feet. The only thing I regret is wasting 4 years with someone who couldn't handle a strong woman. Maybe next time I'll find a real man who doesn't cry over a little joke. And yeah, maybe I miss Mason sometimes when I'm eating my 3rd cup of ramen for the day or dodging calls from debt collectors. But that's his loss, not mine. He's the one who walked away from all this, gestures at my overdue bills and empty apartment, over one little incident. I mean, it's not my fault he couldn't take a joke, right?